Welcome back, readers and writers. Today we are going to be talking about something we have all dealt with, the dreaded writer's block. Writer's block is one of the worst things a writer can experience because it's pretty much going to halt your story and make you feel like there's no way of progressing and you're never going to actually finish your book. But I'm here to tell you that there are ways to get through it, and I'm about to show you what they are. But first, we have to acknowledge that the biggest thing about writer's block is that you cannot use it as an excuse. Imagine you go in to get an oil change for your car, and the mechanic walks up to you and says, "Hey man, I'm sorry, today I just can't change your oil." Well, what do you mean you can't change my oil? Well, sorry, I've just got mechanic's block. I can't help you. You'd be disappointed. You wouldn't even know what to do. You'd be like, what does that even mean? And unfortunately, it's kind of the same thing with writer's block. Writer's block cannot be used as an excuse because if you actually want to be a professional writer and do it as a full-time job, you have to treat it like a full-time job. You can't sit down every single day and go, oh, well, today I just have writer's block. I guess I'm going to give up. No, unfortunately, that's just not going to be an option. You have to treat writer's block as a momentary hurdle that you can overcome. I once learned that the main cause of my writer's block was because I used to think what I was writing was not good enough. I used to sit there and think that every single thing that I wrote during my sessions had to be my best writing or it didn't belong on the page. I didn't realize that you can go back and rewrite things that aren't working, and there's literally nothing wrong with that. That actually should be a part of your process. You have to be content with the fact that when you sit down to write, you might not come up with the best ideas ever, and that's perfectly okay. As long as you're getting words onto the paper, you're ultimately writing something, and eventually you can go back and rewrite that and then refine it into what you really want. Now when I sit down, I focus on having fun. I focus on writing exciting and interesting scenes. I focus on my enjoyment over anything else. If I'm not having fun, then what's the point of writing it? I no longer stress about whether or not I'm writing the greatest thing I've ever come up with. I just write anything I really want to at the time. And I know that I can eventually change my mind down the road, and there's nothing wrong with that. You have to get out of the mindset that what you put on the page is permanent and there's no going back from there. Once you realize that writer's block can be your own insecurity with your writing coming out in the form of mental blocks, then you can really work on getting through it and realizing that it should just be an enjoyable process first and foremost. And the truth is, you're not always going to write your best work. Some of my favorite scenes in my books are ideas that came to me during rewrites and weren't there when I initially sat down to write it. But having something on the page gave me a jumping off point during my rewrites that, oh, I could take it or I could leave it or I could come up with something completely new. But if there's nothing on the page to begin with, then there's going to be nothing there to rewrite when you get to that stage later. So you should really focus on just getting something onto the page because you know you can go back and change it later. But sometimes there just are no words to put on the page, and that's totally okay too. Sometimes you can just be creatively drained, and no matter what you do, sitting down at that computer every day is not actually going to produce anything. So I do have some tips to give you that could help you get over that hurdle. When I'm stuck with writer's block, I like to just take a step back from my work. That doesn't mean that I'm completely forgetting about what I'm writing. It just means that I might not be sitting down at the computer and writing, but instead doing something else while still thinking about my book. And that is the key. When you step away from the writing, you still need to be thinking of your story. I find a lot of writers who get writer's block just give up. And instead of mulling over the details of their story, they either give up and go do something else or they start writing something different. And what I find helps me the most is that when I step away from the computer during writer's block, I'm still actively thinking about my story. I could be going and doing anything else, but I am making sure that my story is still at the front and center of my brain, and I'm constantly working through the details, mulling over the fine intricacies of it, and seeing if I can push through that hurdle in some way that I hadn't really thought of before. By keeping the story in my mind and constantly thinking about it and not letting it leave, I find that eventually my brain will figure out a workaround to get over the writer's block, or it'll come up with a new idea that I never anticipated to imagine. Building on that, I like to go and watch or read other stories and see if it can jumpstart my imagination. Oftentimes I'll read a book that will have such an emotional and powerful scene that I want to recreate in my own writing, and it'll give me that boost that I needed to get over the writer's block and start writing a similar scene. So if you're struggling with writer's block, try and find other stories that can inspire you. You might find that those stories invigorate you and motivate you to sit back down and start working on your book again. By stepping away from my work but keeping the ideas at the front and center of my mind, I find that that is when I have the most clarity and I can see what I was really trying to go for when I sat down and where I got stuck and how I can work around it. And finally, this might not work for everyone, but if you're a pantser like me, I find that writing other scenes not pertaining to the main storyline actually helps me get over my writer's block. By writing something, I'm getting my brain working again, and oftentimes while I'm writing this new scene, I'll go back to what I got stuck on and I'll realize that it actually wasn't as big of an obstacle that I thought it was, and that I can keep going with that main story. I'm not just saying to sit down and write, but I kind of am. Write anything. Take your story in a new direction that you never expected it to go. Don't worry if it makes sense to the overall story or where you're going with it. Just write and have fun. And if you're having fun, then I can guarantee you, you're probably going to eventually break through that writer's block and you'll be able to get back to your main story and carry on business as usual. But ultimately, I find that getting in the habit of writing every single day or writing every time you can makes you realize that you actually don't have time to sit around with writer's block and that you have to carry on the story because, oh, I have to write today. When I realize I have to write today, I know I have to come up with something that day. I can't sit around and mull over the fact that I have writer's block. No, I have to keep going. So what I'll do is I'll sit in that chair, even if I don't have all of the pieces completely buttoned up and put together. I'm just going to start at the beginning of that scene, maybe know where it's going to end, but ultimately I'm just going to let my imagination go. I'm not going to worry if it's the best writing in the world, and I'm just going to have fun with it and see where it takes me. And oftentimes I find myself coming up with ideas that I had never truly seen before and taking the story in a new direction that I had never expected it to go. So I hope those tips help you conquer writer's block once and for all. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you dropped a like and subscribed. And if you have any other ideas of how to get over writer's block, please drop them down in the comments below to share with other people who may be struggling with this. Happy reading and writing, and I'll see you guys next time.